Hi, I'm Anca from MedRise Studio, and this is the place to be to hear about the latest Web3 trends in healthcare. Today, we have a distinguished guest, Mark Bundgaard, who is currently the brilliant Chief Product Officer at Partisia Blockchain. Mark brings an impressive background in computer science and engineering, and he will help us understand the innovative work Partisia is doing, especially in the healthcare industry. And just last week, they were showcasing their solutions at the World Health Assembly in Geneva. Joining us from London is Mark. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mark, it's really great to have you here. And the first thing that I want to get into is, can you tell us a little bit about Partisia and its very unique position as a layer one blockchain? Now, for the listeners who might not be familiar, a layer one blockchain is sort of the foundational layer of a blockchain network. It's essentially the underlying architecture upon which all the other protocols and applications are built, and Bitcoin and Ethereum being very famous layer ones. So can you tell us a bit more about Partisia?
Yes, of course. I think one of the things that we kind of went into when we started developing on the blockchain side was saying, we want a combination of privacy and transparency built in. So here we are actually building a chain with that decentralization as a blockchain is. So you have multiple nodes running, they intercommunicate with each other, so you're able to do transactions and have that real decentralized. And then we combine that with a privacy enhancing technology, is the fancy word of that, called multiparty computation. So the way of being able to take encrypted information, let it stay encrypted, and then being able to compute directly on that encrypted information. That means you can suddenly look at really being able to compute on health information that should not be publicly available, that should stay encrypted. So you can imagine research now on cancer patients being open around the world and keeping that with a blockchain as really the layer that provides transparency of what is happening. So both as what we call an orchestration. So there's transactions coming in. When the computation is done, we're doing a transaction on the chain. So we know that computation started and who's actually doing the computation. None of the data is ever leaked. There is no privacy leakage. And we are really utilizing that combination to build an environment where you can combine countries, different health providers, and kind of enable data and still have the transparency of who's doing the computation on top of that. So for really a layer one here, we are taking that privacy and transparency and interoperability between multiple chains on top of it.
So can you walk us through the decision of going for a layer one, so building your own blockchain protocol rather than using an existing one like most organizations would do nowadays?
When you really get to the nitty-gritty part of it, there is no chain that actually could provide that specific combination of privacy and transparency at the same time. So what we really wanted to do is, so kind of the fun story is you look at, when we started out, we looked at multi-party computation as is and thought, wow, it's amazing. We are able to compute on confidential information and do what is called a confidential computation. And then as part of that, we suddenly saw, oh, a blockchain is an amazing layer of transparency layer, of orchestration layer behind it. And if you kind of turn that around and saying, well, the interest here is instead of always being at a point where you, for instance, have a trusted party managing something specific. So I need to trust a single individual or company to know where all the data is. Here you can say, well, part of this, we can utilize the blockchain of decentralize it. And between that decentralization, we are able to do the computation and utilize the blockchain for sharing data directly and proving that nobody actually owns all the data at the same time. And combining the two things, multi-party computation and blockchain was never being done before. And here you're then saying, well, it's not just about a token, about an economy. No, this is actually about enabling real data, GDPR, NIS2, all the regulation, real data around the world and being able to compute and really utilize that data for real. So that combination is totally unique, and that's why we also took it in. And now combining that in a sense of, well, we're doing a public blockchain as everything, but we are also running the same solution as a private chain inside companies, and then combining the two solutions together. So I can do fully confidential computation with all the proof, auditability, transparency they need, and then combining it through a public blockchain that now interconnects to multiple different countries and companies for that matter.
Let's talk about applications, because we've already heard about the potential of blockchain in healthcare. We've heard about the multiple applications and use cases of blockchain. But now you're telling us that you're bringing together blockchain and multi-party computation, and that opens up a whole new world of possibilities. Can you walk us through what are some of the use cases that you've been exploring at Partisia?
Yes. So let's imagine I have an analyst sitting in a country. Let's say Denmark. I'm from Denmark here, right? So let's say Denmark. And this analyst is very much interested in understanding the different types of behavior or treatments there is for cancer patients around the world. If you look inside Europe, we have a lot of regulations, which we love in the sense of we want consent on who's actually looking at my data, why am I using your data, and I need you as an individual to consent to that. If we take that at a scale, right, just imagine we have Denmark, we have Germany, and we have Poland, and all of them needs to go together and actually do a computation of all the people there is in this set of persons. We would need a lot of consents for all the cancer patients there, right? So here, one of the things we do is, well, because of the chain and because of multi-party computation, we can actually kind of enable that data in the encrypted format. So the analysts are suddenly able to ask questions about, giving all the cancer patients in these 3 countries, what is, for instance, some of the average treatment time? Or should we do a prevalence analysis down on the data they actually enable with them? That means you have a confidential computation with a blockchain behind it that connects to the individual data around the world and actually enable that data with the auditability there also needs to be, right? Why the analyst actually asking for this question, right? So here we utilize the chain as the decentralization. So nobody's owning all the data. We don't move all the data around. And then we have multi-party computations built on top of that that says, yeah, well, the data is encrypted and it needs to stay encrypted. So the output of that computation also privacy preserved, as it's called. So you can't just open the output and see all the data underneath. So that's kind of one thing. And then a different interaction point on that, if you kind of upgrade that a bit, you can look at decentralized identity management. So taking the idea of, I have an identity, it's decentralized, it's provable, it's verifiable credentials. So a lot of words here, but mainly I have a digital wallet where I can represent myself. There is issued a credential about me. It could be my social security number, it could be my healthcare provider that kind of issued a specific credential that proves that I'm me. And if somebody asks a question that I would like to use your cancer data, your cancer patient data, I could actually get it inside my wallet and then consent on that information directly on chain. So even though I sit in Denmark as an analyst, I can suddenly ask questions for consent, maybe even questions about, could you be interested in opening more of your data? Because we can see you're part of a subset that potentially is infected by X, for instance, right? So here we're again back to, instead of having a centralized approach to having one company or individual deciding who's what and why, you have decentralization where an analyst are able to ask inside the decentralized network with the total confidentiality. I'm not breaching any of the privacy, and it still ends up at the individual that are able to say, okay, there's actually a question for me here. I could consent and potentially even present a credential that it's all right that you compute on my data, or I want to know more about what you're actually computing on. Does that make sense a bit?
Yes, it does make sense. And it makes me think of the fact that we've been talking a lot on this podcast about this type of applications that bring more security, traceability, and that
Hmm.
ultimately bring a lot of value to healthcare stakeholders, whether it is industry, healthcare professionals, even patients
Hmm.
themselves. But what we've seen in healthcare is that it's a sector that comes with a lot of challenges, especially when we
Yes.
want to introduce a new technology. And
Yeah.
what we've seen is that maybe not everyone is very aware of the security and trust issues there are in healthcare, and therefore they struggle to understand, why do we need a solution for these things if we don't believe that these problems even exist, because this is not
Mm.
something that is very visible, right? And
Mm.
so we sometimes struggle to explain the value that a blockchain solution might bring to the healthcare industry, because the
Mm.
underlying problem is not always very identified. And I can
Mm.
only imagine how much more difficult it is when you come with a layer one solution, which is a very
Mm.
technical infrastructural solution rather than just an application. And
Mm.
what does this conversation feel like for you with healthcare stakeholders? First of all, who are you addressing? And what are some of the challenges that you've been facing?
A great question. Let's split it up a bit then. So if we look, for instance, if we look inside the market in Asia, for instance, we have a lot of discussions around the transparency of data and the decentralization of data. So a society that have a lot of health information that potentially is very centralized in a region that could be affected by earthquakes, for instance. A great example is earthquakes. A lot of the work we look here or do here is really talking with decision makers, stakeholders of what happens if our centralized solution is affected by earthquake. Right? We are more or less at a point where data is either fully lost or fully unavailable. Right? We talk medicine, we talk test result, we even potentially talk of actually being able to do the treatment that needs to be done for actually saving a life. Right? And here it becomes more of a, I don't say layer one. I say, here is decentralization. Here is a way where we can help you know that data can be decentralized, right? Split out, sharded out, and protected, right? So in the event of an earthquake or any natural disaster, we are more or less helping and saying, well, data is still available. Yes, you still need hardware, but still available. At the same time, there's also part of that digitalization of being able to have, again, the word transparency and audibility of who's using the data and why it's used, right?
So data
If we then go,
continuity.
yeah, yes. So it, definitely data continuity, but also the understanding of that you should know why data is used, right? You should know how it's used and when it's used. And where we combine the multi-party computation on top of that, also you're able to compute on that data, even though it's decentralized, right? If we then go kind of the opposite way, we take the European interaction point here. Most of us are lucky enough to be living in countries where we are very digitalized already. So in Denmark, for instance, my health data has been digitalized for the last 40 years, more or less. I have a lot of my health data directly on my device. Brilliant, amazing. But it's still at a case of centralization, right? It's still databases, hopefully a couple of data centers, but it's still at least centralized in that way. And here the approach kind of get different. We're saying, well, based on how much we protect the privacy, the individual of that data, we actually want to be able to create more impact with the data we already have, right? So the layer one now becomes a way of bridging for, here's healthcare data, here is potentially banking data, here is insurance data. None of those are allowed to leave the interaction point of where it is, right? You kind of have a gated community in each, but where we kind of use the chain is saying, oh, I can actually bridge it here. I can use the chain as the audibility layer of when data is moved, how it's moved, and then do confidential computation on top of that, right? So you are suddenly able to combine data that normally you're not allowed to, right? Because you need to open the data, but here it stays encrypted, confidential, and you're still able to innovate. When we talk about, AI, for instance, right? We talk about new medicine, drug discovery, right? All of that now gets a voice by having data that is normally very, very encrypted, very, very protected. Well, you utilize the combination of a chain for the transparency, auditability, the privacy, even the security aspect of this, who's allowed to do what. And then you're putting the computation on top as a confidential computing. So the space here between countries is very different, but I think overall the dream scenario for where we are sitting is, imagine being able to do the computation between Japan, US, and Europe, and keep it confidential, right? Keep it privacy preserved, but fully audible and transparent what is happening as part of those computations, and utilizing the chain for giving the proof mechanism of, well, the data is correct, that the data is used correctly, who's using it, and we can prove who's done it, and then providing results that could potentially change the world, especially inside healthcare. I think the more good data you have, the higher the chances for actually developing something that really can impact the world we live in today, right?
And who invests in this type of solutions today? Is it more your public or private sector, or both?
Yeah, it's both. So when we look inside Denmark, I'll use Denmark as the example again. Most of our hospitals in Denmark are public hospitals, but a lot of their interest is also saying, how do we combine some of this information? We see larger projects where we take the Danish Health Data Authority, right, and the Danish statistics, saying, okay, this is actually two enormous databases, totally isolated, never allowed to touch each other, right? And here they're saying we are very much interested in being able to combine information here, right? Being able to know, if I combine my health data with the socioeconomic data of Denmark, what is actually happening inside the field, and think we can do even more, both on the treatment side, predicting how should we help people better, potentially also on the drug discovery side, right? When we look into the, for instance, the Japanese market, well, most hospitals are private, but for them, there's still a risk of, I'm just a single hospital, right? Could I maybe combine some of the work I do with other private hospitals without necessarily leaking, so to say, my information I have, but utilizing the chain for actually being able to communicate with them in that encrypted data they have on both sides, right? And it's a protection mechanism at the same time. I think I kind of repeating myself a bit here, but for really being able to do some of this, you need to prove not just the privacy and the encryption mechanism of stuff, but also the transparency of why am I doing something and who is doing it, right? And that combination is very, very unique in this space.
Mark, I have a last question for you, which is a bit further away from what we've been discussing, but just out of curiosity, I saw that Partisia is based in Zug, which is known as the Crypto Valley. I was really curious because we've been hearing about Zug for quite a while, and it was a very famous at the beginning of the crypto world and all this movement. How is it now? And what are some of the advantages that you find being incorporated there?
So I think first of all, the word crypto value kind of puts itself in there still, and I think just the networking capability of Zug is amazing. There's a lot of players in the field, and also a lot of people that does very interesting things in the space of blockchain that is very different, right? And for us, it's also important being at a place where we can network and kind of expand from that to other countries at the same time, right? And part of that is also, if we look at some of the regulations there is around the world for actually being able to run a layer one and really prove that it's a foundation, right? It's not just the company running, it's really decentralized. We have gotten a lot of great things in Zug from a regulation standpoint, from a compliance standpoint too, that they are able to provide because they have so much experience in it. And I think for us, it's kind of a stepping stone because of course we need to be fully compliant here and also able to challenge some of the rules there is around the world, and taking that into Europe, taking that into Asia, taking that to the US. So I think you should see from us it's placed at the right place for actually being able to take a large part of the discussion, because they have so much experience in Zug as part of that.
Okay, so it's still very interesting from a networking and regulatory standpoint.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Mark, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing all your insights with us. We look forward to seeing you at the Nordic Blockchain Conference in just a couple of weeks from now. It was great having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's it for today. I will see you soon for another Web3 adventure in healthcare.